we're going to see a lot more of the white backlash tale.
Yeah.
The media, they're in a very difficult position. There's nothing they can do to get out of this horrible mess in the end. But they are in a very difficult position. If they talk up the backlash too much,
yeah, they could actually preempt it.
they could actually cause it.
Yeah.
Monkey see, monkey do.
Mm.
So I would, for instance, suspect that while we'll hear in the newspapers, especially mainly for the newspapers of the political elite, we'll hear stories about mosques that have been petrol bombed. I don't think we'll see them on television.
No,
because
I
of the
think
fear
you're
of
right.
it, of the fear of it spreading.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they've got to have enough of a backlash to make their propaganda point and to justify arresting or jailing white extremists at the same time as they're jailing and arresting Muslim extremists. So I think we'll see a fair bit of this talk.
Yeah.
Even though at the same time as some of the massage, I think they're covering some of it up.
What do you think the likelihood of these terror events? Do you think they'll happen again?
It's inevitable. I think it's quite likely that with 4 dead, 1 fled abroad, and a number of other arrests as well, I think it's quite likely that this particular terror cell is now finished.
Yeah.
Apparently Al-Qaeda type operations, basically when they have one of their terror cells, or even an individual suicide bombing operation launched in typically Palestine or Chechnya or whatever, the cell comes together, it has its operation, it's then given an Islamic name of one of the previous martyrs, then it disappears, it's just disbanded, it ceases to be. So with the 4 main grunts on the ground in little pieces, that's it, this cell may well be finished.
Yeah.
There may be 1 or 2 more out there for a second hit, but what is, I think, absolutely inevitable is that they're clearly, out of 3,000 people who've been trained in terror camps in Afghanistan, according to the authorities, and the dozens, if not hundreds, who've gone to Iraq recently and taken part in operations against British and American troops from Britain, and the ones who are constantly going over to Pakistan, to and fro, being sent, as several of these were, from the secular West, being sent to religious schools in Pakistan. They don't need to be able to recite all 6,666 verses or whatever it is of the Quran to fit into Western society. They're going over there, and some of those schools also provide military training. So even if this cell has done its work, there'll be others all ready to go when they can get them operational, or rather when they want to get them operational. I think this is a staggered thing. They want it to go on and on. And apart from that, there's also the fact that I have no doubt that there'll have been hundreds, if not thousands, of 14, 15, 16-year-old Muslim youths who are now looking at the pictures of those 4 and idolising them.
Yeah, it's
thinking,
a frightening thing.
That's what I want to be, that's what I'm going to do. And something quite minor in their own lives, or something they've seen on television, Muslims being mistreated somewhere in the world. And of course, in order to push multiculturalism, our media for years has been boosting how badly these poor people are treated, and how wonderful their religion is. So it's given thousands of their youngsters alternately sort of superiority complexes, chips on their shoulders as well, and they'll have been watching these and they'll think, yeah, that's what I want to do. And I think quite possibly the real problem for a vaguely stable Britain it might be 5 or 6 years before this really strikes home what this has done, because I think that almost every young white for whom this is really the first thing where they've taken notice of an external political event, because it's not about, I'm not talking about beyond childhood memories, but young teenagers who up until now have only been interested in football and girls and smoking an illicit cigarette or whatever. I think this will be the first thing that will really struck millions of them and made them really think about politics. And similarly in the Islamic community, this will be the first thing that thousands of them who at present are 8 or 9 or 10 or 12, this will be the first thing they really remember.
I think,
and I think in 5 or 6 years' time, when those 2 young generations have grown to the age when they're starting to become political or are old enough to go to Pakistan to a madrasa or whatever and think about what are they going to do with their lives, that's when the trouble's going to strike, I think.
Yeah, I think even the left-wing media accept that things just aren't going to be the same again, are they?
No, never
But,
again. I think this change is actually, I think this 7/7, I believe, will have a bigger effect on Britain and perhaps even Europe than 9/11 had on the United States. Because in the case of the United States, it was outsiders, not their own, not their own
No, that's
people,
true.
not homegrown.
Yeah.
And it was, although they were only using knives, box cutters, it was an extraordinarily sophisticated attack, which is almost impossible to visualise happening again because of all the extra security.
Yeah.
And it's only a threat to people in very large, very prestigious buildings. I don't think there's any comparison between that and what's happened in Britain now.
No, there isn't.
When it's, for the Americans, it's a low-flying plane has been something is it? Whereas for everyone in Britain now, it's the Pakistani with a shopping bag.
Yeah.
And I think long-term it's going to have a far, far bigger effect on Britain and British politics than 9/11 had on the United States.
Yeah, I mean, you're in court, of course, soon. The publicly funded BBC and the government, of course, trying to lock you up for saying some pretty informative things. Many people think about Islam. How do you think public opinion will deal with that? That the BBC and the Labour Party are still trying to lock you up?
Well, I saw the lawyers the other day, and the first thing the main man said, he said, I can guarantee to you that the people who decided to bring this case will now be bitterly regretting they ever even considered it. He said it's a disaster, a catastrophe for them, because if we have a trial quickly, the chances of them getting an unbiased white jury to convict are almost zero.
Yeah.
If, on the other hand, they drop lucky and get a heavily ethnic jury, although Sikhs and Hindus and blacks are going to come down on our side anyway when they see what I've been saying. But if they get a heavily Muslim jury, or they rig it and I'm convicted, he said, well, at that stage, you're a martyr to free speech and having warned, because everything that I said in those speeches is going to come out in the newspapers in a trial which is probably going to go on the best part of 4 weeks under intense media scrutiny. For instance, the girl on the receptionist desk at the solicitors, when I went in, asked if she could have next week's lottery numbers.
Really?
Because when I hadn't obviously seen the speech for quite some time, when we played it back and looked at it, it's quite astounding. Until just before the 7/7, the prosecution was, one of their key complaints was that Griffin says that this is more or less a direct quote. Griffin says that sooner or later there will be terrorist bombs going off in Britain, which has now happened, and when that happens, it'll either be done by asylum seekers or by, quote, second generation Pakistanis from somewhere like Bradford, unquote.
You got that wrong then, didn't you?
So I'm 8 miles out, sorry. Now, I think it's still quite likely that it'll turn out that one or two of the masterminds of this, or the preachers who in the end are the ones who started it all off, will turn out to have been asylum seekers. And certainly we've got the second generation Pakistanis.
Yeah.
I didn't get the fact they were going to be suicide bombers, so it's even worse than I said. But even to the point, that's what they complained about. But when looking at the speech, the piece I'd forgotten, because they hadn't reminded me, this is 18 months ago now, I went on to say that when it happens, it'll probably be London, although it could be Birmingham, which of course had this massive scare when, according to the Birmingham papers, although it hasn't really come out anywhere else yet, there was a terrorist suspect
with explosives in the car,
walking around on the loose that the security services managed to lose, exactly, with traces of explosives in the car they'd been using. So it's a serious possibility that Birmingham was a real target.
Yeah.
So I said London or Birmingham, and if they hit London, they'll hit tube trains and buses.